Hey everyone, just
Got
a
it.
quick video on war photographer. Helping out one of my students here at the moment just to get some of the key quotes and things. And I figured it's a good little 5 minute video, really. So with war photographer, what you have to remember is that this is a film photography sort of film camera. So you'd put a little film actually in the camera, you'd wind it up, stuff like that. Closest thing today is like Polaroid cameras. You know how you take a photo, it spits out the little white square, and then in a couple minutes it develops the photo onto that white square. Lots of like, I'm thinking about my cousin. She's a bit of a hipster. She does that all the time. So then remember that the guy's life, the war photographer's life, is effectively a cycle. And we'll talk about how it's cyclical in a second through some of the quotes. And that's one of the reasons why the poem is written in what's called sestets, these 6 line stanzas. It's to show that there's just this unending cycle of him going off to a war zone, taking photos. He takes hundreds of photos. We're going to talk about that as well. Then he comes back to England. He goes into what's called his dark room. Now, a dark room, let me just quickly show you a dark room. Dark room. Dark room was like this. This is, these aren't brilliant photos, actually. Yeah, dark room. It kind of looks creepy, doesn't it? It's basically a room that would have been only red light allowed in, and red light doesn't mess with the development of the photos. Any other light back then would have messed with the development of the photos. So they're in the dark room, and he develops his photos. It's all of hideous stuff from war, death, destruction, pain, suffering, and then he gives his 100 agonies, his however many pictures, to his editor because he works for a newspaper, and his editor picks out 5 or 6 of the 100, and then the public reads the newspaper. Their eyeballs prick with tears, so they get a little bit of emotion, a bit emotional from what they see, but then they go back to their bath and pre-lunch beers. And then he goes back again on another aeroplane, staring out the window, onto another war zone, onto another 100 agonies, onto another editor cutting it down to 4 or 5, onto another newspaper article. Another person reads it, gets a bit sad, goes back to his bath and beers. It's just this unending cycle of war and death and destruction, and nothing seems to be stopping it. So that's what war photography is all about. Now let's look at some of the key quotes from the text, from the poem, just to give you some core ideas of what you can do. So in his dark room, this could be also seen as a play on words or a double meaning or double entendre, because obviously the room is a dark room in photography, but also maybe this is a dark place for him as he reflects on the deaths that he's seen in war. Yeah, so it's both. It's his dark room, literally the dark room that he develops the photos, but it's also a dark room as in it's a room that he feels darkness in because he's developing this evil. Spools of suffering set out in ordered rows. So you've got the sibilance in this quote here. Sibilance is often used to create a sinister tone, and that is what's happening here, a sinister tone. And a spool, I don't know if I'll be able to give a brilliant definition, is basically like a reel. Like, so, the film is reeled up in this little cylinder. And as he's developing the photos, he's pulling out from this reel all of his negatives of the photos, and it's a reel of suffering. So it's like he's pulling out more and more death and more destruction as he's developing his pictures. So that's the spools of suffering. And then there's this little tricolon here, or triadic structure, of 3 different very bad places for war. So if you want to add some context to this poem, I would talk about this triadic structure. So Belfast, you had the IRA and conflict between mostly the Protestants and the Catholics. Lots of people died, explosions, death. You've got Beirut, another hideous war zone. And you then had Phnom Penh. Phnom Penh, I visited Phnom Penh. This is in Cambodia, very hideous war zone. It was like genocide. Basically, this guy called Pol Pot actually ended up killing, like, I think it was a third of the population. Imagine a third of England being wiped out in a regime. And most of them were killed in horrible ways with like freaking pitchforks and shovels like that. You know, there'd be soldiers going around. They didn't have much money for guns and things like that. Quite a poor, underdeveloped country at the time. So they'd be getting shovels, bashing these people on the head, and then like just digging the shovels into these guys' necks and killing them in fields. Just terrible. So, you know, the reason I mention this is because, again, this poem is meant to wake you up. It's meant to make you be like, there's so much war in the world. There's so much suffering. We need to do something about this. That's why Carol Ann Duffy wrote it. A couple more quotes. So he has a job to do. His hands tremble now that he's back in rural England. So a lot of the poems in this Power and Conflict anthology deal a lot with PTSD. And this here is called synecdoche because his hands are the part of him that represent his fear. He's got shaky hands. Yeah. And it's to show the PTSD, the fact that he's going through trauma, going into these war zones, taking these horrible photos of people who are dying and being killed and then coming back. So when he gets back to England, his hands are trembling. He's scared. He's got PTSD. And he has flashbacks as well. So you've got, you know, he's back to rural England. So this is a place where fields don't explode beneath the feet and there aren't running children in a nightmare heat. Now, I think one of the reasons that I like these two lines is because it's vivid imagery of war. So you've got the imagery of the war, you've got the imagery of, you know, fields exploding. So this is really scary. Imagine going into your local park or wherever and just an explosion blowing you up or blowing someone up in front of you. Very scary. And running children in a nightmare heat. This idea that their world is a nightmare. There's the heat of all the flames from all the like destruction around them. It's really negative and scary war kind of imagery. And it also gives us a sense of what the war photographer is taking photos of. So some of his photos are going to be explosions. Some of his photos are going to be children being blown up or running away scared from things. Hideous, hideous, hideous. Then he goes back to the photo. So it says something is happening. A stranger's features faintly start to twist before his eyes, a half-formed ghost. Now, this is what I was saying to you before about the development of the photo. So back then, when you developed a photo, it would start as just a plain piece of paper, well, not paper, but a plain bit of film, a plain photo, right? That just white or just black, nothing on it. And then slowly over several minutes, the photo would develop out onto the photograph itself. And so as he's talking about the stranger twisting on before his eyes, it's this idea that slowly the person is like developing on the photograph. And it's then a half-formed ghost. That's a metaphor because, so it's imagery and it's metaphor because the ghost is half-formed because they've only just died. So it's a half-formed ghost because he's literally just seen this bloke being killed in war or whatever, and now he's developing the photo of him. Okay, and as if this isn't bad enough, all of this horrible imagery of death and war and whatever, the final stanza is the worst stanza in that sense. So what happens here is there are 100 agonies in black and white. So there's this gives us this is symbolic of all the pain of war. There are hundreds, if not thousands, if not tens of thousands, if not millions of people that are in agony. This is an extreme pain in war. And yet the editor picks out 5 or 6. So this is a juxtaposition because the editor is only showing, and it shows sort of a censorship because he's only showing the 5 or 6 photos that he thinks are most important. But the truth is that there's so much more to war than those 5 or 6 photos that you get to see. And then the reader, their eyeballs prick with tears between their bath and pre-lunch beers. So this bit here is the saddest bit probably of the whole poem because ultimately the reader, you and I, are the people that could make a difference. So there's this tragedy that the reader doesn't do anything about the war. For 1 minute, they get sad, they well up, maybe they've seen a picture of a dying kid, it makes them sad, but then they go back to the luxury of their lives. So we're very lucky to live in a safe, comfortable country. And so, you know, the bath and the pre-lunch beers, bath is symbolic of the comfort, the fact that we don't have to worry about war in this country right now. And so because we don't have to care, we just carry on with our comfort and we don't really think of the pain of others. And so then there's the cyclical nature, as I said, at the very end here, the aeroplane, he stares out of his aeroplane. So it's cyclical because he's back out. He's going to another war zone. He's going to another war zone, and it's all going to be the same story. Same story will repeat again. So it ends up being this very depressing poem of this mad cycle that's just going on and on and on, back and forth forever. So there's a ton of quotes for you in about 5 minutes. I hope that was helpful. I'll catch you in the next one.